The People's Business is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
A pleasant good night to you and welcome to another edition of The People's Business. I'm Shane Seeley, and tonight we're talking about crime. And how do we fight crime? Well, in these times, we're using data. So the topic tonight, fighting crime using research. And to help us interpret some of the information that we'll share with you tonight, we have our friends from the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit. With us tonight, we have the director, Cheryl Willoughby. We also have Tameshia Howell. She's a senior statistician with the CJRPU. And also with us tonight, we have Fabian Sargeant. He's a program officer with the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps. Also expecting to join us tonight is an official from the Royal Barbados Police Force. His name, Mark White. He's an assistant superintendent of police. So stay tuned. We have an interesting one for you tonight. We'll take a quick break and be back with more on The People's Business. Back with you here on The People's Business as we talk fighting crime using the research. And we have a number of topics to delve into tonight related to crime. Of course, gun-related crime. We're going to talk about the youth involved in crime as well. And the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit, they have been really doing a lot of research, and you'll get to see some of that research that they have been doing, some of the results of the research. And we're going to get into that very shortly. But let me welcome back Cheryl Willoughby and Tameshia Howell, along with Fabian Sargeant. It's good to have you on the program. It's good not to talk about COVID for a bit, but even with COVID-19, we know that the pandemic has influenced how things happen in our society as well, related to crime. But we're not even going there yet. I want to talk about the role of the CJRPU, the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit. You don't often hear about it in everyday conversations, but you all have been doing some good work, and it's been helping our law enforcement agencies to address crime in a big way. So Cheryl, as you're the director, let's start with you. Talk about the work of the unit.
Good night, Shane. Good night, Barbados. The Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit, before 2012, we were known as the National Task Force on Crime Prevention, but we've had a name change given the mandate that we have now. What the department does is that we take statistics and we convert them into statistical reports for the information of the Attorney General and our stakeholders who are involved in planning programs and projects aimed at crime prevention, or even stymieing what is already happening at the national level as it relates to crime. Over the years, we have been partnering with several organizations, including NGOs and international organizations, to fight crime using statistics. We have the mantra that evidence based decision making is the way to go. No longer can we rely on anecdotal evidence or information or hearsay information in order to plan programs and projects aimed at crime prevention or even working with our youth. Over the years, we have worked with agencies like the Ministry of Youth. We have that department represented here by Mr. Sargeant. We have also worked very closely with the Royal Barbados Police Force. We utilize their statistics. We work closely with them, even to go into the communities to target at risk youth, as well as to plan and implement programs at the community level. We also have been over the years working in schools as well. So our mandate is quite wide, and although we are a research based organization, we also focus on assisting other departments and ministries with planning and implementing crime prevention initiatives aimed at addressing all the crimes that we are seeing over the past couple of years, especially serious crimes as it relates to gun violence, etc. We've also gone into the prison. We do quite a bit of work in the prison. We go into the prison. We've recently done a profile of the prison where one of our senior officers, she went into the prison and gave us a snapshot of those who are incarcerated. So we have a good understanding of some of the criminal risk factors that we're dealing with. And as a result of that, we pass our information on to our stakeholders, who then utilize our statistics, our data into their planning and their strategic um, projections for the upcoming years. So
Right.
that despite it may be boring, our research is out there and we are utilizing statistics effectively in order to address crime and criminal behavior at the community levels.
Cheryl, you say your research may be boring, but it will make for some interesting discussion tonight. I've been going through some of the slides and some of these reports, some interesting topics you cover: the examination of gun-related homicides in Barbados for the last decade and the phase one of 2021. And you also have a preliminary report on the nature of gun violence in Barbados. And we'll get to those. What I
Yes.
want to know from Tameshia is, in terms of gathering the statistics, how do you go about doing that, Tameshia?
Hi, good night, Shane, and good night to our viewers. Gathering statistics, it can take two forms with our department. It often is numerical, which will be statistics from the police, or sometimes when we go into communities and we are doing surveys, public opinion surveys. So then that when we put that information into what we have, SPSS, which is a package that we use to analyze our data, that's numerical. We also do interviews. We do interviews with stakeholders. We also, as the director was saying, we go into the prison where we interview some of the inmates. And it's not only the inmates, sometimes we interview persons from the jail, yes, sometimes we interview persons from the prison. So in collecting data, it can be either numbers, words from the interviews, or persons' experience.
Interesting. Fabian, a lot of the crime that I see and that we are seeing playing out in society as well is being committed by young adults or adolescents, young people. And it is a cause for concern, and it's showing up in some of the data and the research done by the unit. Talk to us about your role with the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps and how you're helping to steer some of these young individuals away from a life of crime and being a part of these statistics.
One of the program officers at the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps, and one of my primary responsibilities is that of personal development. What we really do, actually all the programs that we implement are needs-based, meaning that we take that information that is produced, let's say by the criminal, by Ms. Willoughby and her team, and we look at that data and we try to take out exactly where the challenges are. Now, sometimes the data will be raw, and you look at it in its natural organic sense, and you realize that there's a lot more that is happening now. Crime or the criminal activity that young people are demonstrating is only a result of something. Okay, these young people don't just wake up one day and just become criminals. There's a background story, there's an environmental story, there's a psychological story, there's a social story. And as professionals, what we try to do is to dissect all of that information and put it into perspective and see exactly what are the best programs that we can implement based on the needs identified within these coming out of this information, and how best we can deliver it. Now, again, as I said, the whole concept of crime happens at the end. So that's a issue, and there's a deeper cause. So we try to get to the deeper aspects of these young people, whether it be through counseling, whether it be through trying to get them to understand themselves in a deeper way, and ultimately impacting on their home environments as well, because the we have a counseling department that actually goes out and do home assessments and pretty much get a picture of what is happening in the environment of these young people that would contribute to the behaviors that they display.
And it's good to see the linkages between the organizations, and as Cheryl would have mentioned too, they do work closely with the Royal Barbados Police Force. So I'm looking at some of the data, and we'll all get to talk about how each agency is working with the data to help address some of the problems that we are seeing in society. But I'm looking at some of these key points coming out of the research. So the first report was an examination of gun-related homicides in Barbados, and we mentioned the period. The second report, a preliminary one on the nature of gun violence in Barbados. And when you come down to the summary, there are a number of graphs. We have our statistician here to go through those specifics. But when you look at the summary of this report, you're seeing that Barbados, there's a lucrative market for supply of illegal firearms in Barbados. You're also seeing that illegal firearms can be easily obtained in Barbados. There's a growing street culture as well. Cheryl, let's talk about some of these highlights coming out of the research. How did we get at this point? How does the research speak to this, and how does the research help the police, for instance, and Fabian, for instance, to address some of these concerns that you're seeing coming out of the data?
Well, this is one of the research projects that we would have done over the past 2 years or so, where we examine not only gun-related incidents of crime, but also we looked at homicides that were perpetrated as a result of gun violence. And what we found was that, as you rightly said, Shane, guns are easily available in our communities. We found that most of the perpetrators are young men between 20 and 29 years old, as well as the victims of these gun related murders. So that when we examine the data and we delve down into some of the key criminogenic factors that are leading our young people in the direction of committing serious crime, what we are finding is that the demographics are similar. There are the young people who have left school at an early age without obtaining certification. They have no skills. There are the young people who are experiencing serious problems within their families as it relates to guidance and discipline, etc. And there are young people who were identified from early within the school system who did not receive the necessary interventions that would have turn them away from a life of crime. So that when we examine all these criminogenic factors or risk factors, as we like to call them, we are seeing similar trends across all the communities. Also, we would have done some research that looked at high crime communities, those communities that are prone to violence, and we found similar risk factors among those communities that we surveyed. for example, how high unemployment rates, a lot of young people hanging on the blocks, no real goals in mind, as well as no opportunities as far as they're concerned for self improvement. So that when this information is given, for example, to the Ministry of Youth, we anticipate that some of the programs that they have or that they design and implement will take these factors into consideration. And I'm sure Tameshia, as my statistician, can speak in more detail about some of the findings of this study, given that she was the lead researcher involved in the study and some of the recommendations that came out of that study.
Yes, it's a lot of detailed work. Tameshia, maybe you can mention, looking at the first report, I mean, when you see these figures coming out of it, it must have been startling to you putting this all together. And a lot of young men have really, it points to the problems with a lot of young men in our society. That's what the numbers are suggesting, that they're the ones affected.
Yes, Shane, but I think we also have to know, if you look at the statistics, the graphs, that Barbados generally homicides tend to have dips and peaks. So in over 11 years, we had our homicide was generally between 20 to 30. But the last 2 years, yes, we went to 48 and 41. But again, that was a peak. So our homicides tend to fluctuate. It's only the last 2 years that we actually went over our range, which is between 20, as I was saying before, and 30 plus. Also, when it comes to the age, is usually we saw in this homicide that a lot of young males under 29 were both victims and perpetrators of homicide in general and gun related homicides. So it's saying now that going forward, any programs, any projects, any intervention that we're doing, we must target this group, because yes, I recognize that if you look at the data, that other age groups also are mentioned, but this is the one that is really concerning. So going forward, I think that any projects need to target this. And then when we target this age group, we also need to look at as the director was saying, the criminal risk factors, which came out to the profile. And that was the lack of education and
Yeah.
also the need to protect themselves. It has become a trend, a fashion, a culture. So we have to find somewhere to change these mindsets, to let them realize, this is not the way. There's an alternative to it, and encourage education and some of our other form of employment.
Yeah, those are young
And
men
Shane,
that
I
would
want
have left school recently. Cheryl, I know you want to add something. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back in a few moments. For you, those of you who want to call in tonight, remember you can dial these numbers, 228-5562, 228-5563, to be a part of the program as we speak about fighting crime using research. We will be back in a few moments. We're talking fighting crime using research here on the People's Business, and we have Cheryl Willoughby. She's the director of the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit. Along with her, Tameshia Howell, a senior statistician with the unit, and Fabian Sargeant. He's the program officer with the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps. Before we went to break, Cheryl, you wanted to add to what Tameshia was saying a short moment ago?
Yes, I wanted to emphasize the importance of education in our schools as it relates to crime. We did a study back in 2015 that was commissioned by my department and conducted by Dr. Devonish, Dr. Pat Saul, and Dr. Sylvia Henry. And the results that they found was startling because what they did, they actually went into the prison and tested the population within the prison to see the level that they were functioning at. And we were surprised that the majority of persons who were incarcerated, especially for serious crimes, were functioning at the levels of 3 and 5 year olds, meaning that they did not have those necessary literacy skills that we require of our people in order for them to function. So, therefore, it is important that when we are planning interventions within our schools, we have to take into consideration some of the learning challenges that our young people have. For example, they may be dyslexic, they may be suffering from some other learning challenge that we need to pick up on early, because this research that we conducted definitely revealed to us that there's a strong link between illiteracy and criminal behavior. So that is an area that we need to focus on within our school system and as well as within our families, because it is incumbent on families to pick up early when their children have these challenges and to refer them to the necessary agencies and departments that can assist them with these problems that they're having.
When I think about the age group that is most impacted, that 21 to 29, those boys, those men in their 20s, those are youngsters who would have not too long left school, possibly 3 or 4, in some cases 5 years out of school. So recent school leavers who possibly didn't decide to carry on their education. So in terms of planning, because as you rightly said, Cheryl, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. What do you see in terms of planning for that group of individuals to help them? And Fabian, I want to come to you here after Cheryl, to help them. What is the plan? What are some of the plans coming out to help those youngsters stay away from a life of crime?
Well, our department, as I mentioned earlier, we are not only involved in analyzing raw statistics or going out and doing surveys and making sure that we get a good picture of what is happening on the ground. What we also do, we work with institutions to plan crime prevention programs. We are all specialists in that area, so we are in a position to assist departments to put together programs to target specific risk factors for children who may be having problems at school. We would have worked with the government industrial school. We went in there on a yearly basis and we did programs with the government industrial school. We also worked with the Edna Nichols Center. We worked with schools, both primary and secondary schools. We had our mascot, Charlie, went into the schools, and we had a vibrant program, the Dispute Resolution and Conflict Mediation Program, which was developed based on the criminal risk factors that we identified from those persons who were getting involved in gun violence and other serious crimes. And based on that program, we were able to make a big impact on what we were seeing within our schools. Quite a few children that were involved in those programs went on to live productive lives and never got involved in criminal behavior again. And we had some positive reports coming out of the schools based on the children that would have passed through our programs. I must also state that we work closely with the Juvenile Liaison Scheme. As you know, the Juvenile Liaison Scheme is part of the Royal Barbados Police Force. It's a department that intervenes in the lives of children before they actually interface with the juvenile justice system. And working with them, I was on their committee and we looked at some of the children that were passing through the juvenile liaison scheme. And as a result of those initiatives, we were able then to make recommendations regarding some of the interventions that were necessary to divert these young people from the juvenile justice system. So that when we talk about planning, it's about using the research, using the information to identify areas that need strengthening. Barbados has a lot of resources, but what we need to do is to utilize those resources more effectively and to strengthen areas that we believe that need strengthening, building the capacity of the organizations that are targeting at-risk populations.
Okay, we'll take a quick commercial break here, but when we come back, we want to talk about these conversations with some of these youngsters, Fabian. That's where we'll go, because when I look at the another slide here with motivation for firearm possession or use, it has some interesting findings as well. So we'll get into that when we return right here on The People's Business as we talk about fighting crime using the research. For those viewers who want to call to talk about fighting crime using research as we get into what is happening in our society with gun violence and other related crime involving our youth, you can call 228-5562 or 228-5563 to join the conversation. And speaking about conversation, Fabian, I want to talk about that because you would be intimately involved with in terms of having conversations with these young men to find out where their head is at. You know, what they're thinking, what they want to do, and how they want to change maybe from that going down the wrong path, a deviant lane, to probably a better life where they can be productive members of our society. So what are some of those conversations like? What are you hearing? What are some of the most startling things that you've heard from some of these young gentlemen with the Barbados Youth Advance Corps?
Before I give you that background in terms of what I'm hearing, let me mention that the Ministry of Youth have been extremely active in their response to this whole issue associated with violence, and where we've had a major anti-violence campaign, and the campaign has been separated in such a way that we try to target young people at all levels. Those on the blocks, we try to target those within schools, we try to target fathers, families, okay? So we try to hit young people at all aspects. A major part of that campaign is utilizing technology, where there's a heavy presence on social media. They're involved. There's also a heavy involvement in music, where they were asking people to submit songs. There were jingles that were done. So the response to the anti-violence campaign to this entire phenomena as it relates to the violence, the ministry have been doing a phenomenal job in terms of trying to really get out there and get that message that violence, you don't have to engage in violence, and that there's always an alternative. In terms of what you're hearing from the young men, a number of these young men are experiencing challenges with stuff that would have went on in their childhood. Most of the time you speak to them, you're hearing really and truly like what they experience as a child, maybe physical abuse, challenges within the home, So there are a number of issues. And then there's this whole cultural dynamic, what we consider as this whole toxic or this whole false sense of masculinity, where men supposed to solve conflict by using their hands and their fists, and men are supposed to be big and strong, and boys are supposed to act out. And then there's also the whole concept that boys generally were not taught how to deal with conflict in the household. If you get in a fight, go outside and bust your head. Use your hands. Don't let anybody hit you. If somebody hit you, hit them back. As opposed to young boys being taught positive ways of dealing with conflict and identifying that there are alternatives. There are ways to manage that anger, and there are ways to even identify what they're actually feeling. So a whole set of stuff has been left out of their cultural upbringing, and due to that void, due to the fact that a number of things were left out. Remember, children move into adolescence. These adolescents move into adults. So now what we're seeing at the adult level is really a lot of the issues that stem from childhood just being manifested. Okay, so a number of these boys are just really crying out for support. They're crying out for attention, and they really, really, really need the help of all of the necessary agencies to provide that support for them.
Well, we are glad that you and your team are doing the best you can to address some of these issues. We do have a caller on the line, our first caller for the night. Welcome to the People's Business. Caller, what's your question?
Hi, good night to all in the panel. Hope everyone had a good day today. I tuned in from the time the show started, and I must say that I like the dialogue that you guys are having, because I believe that as a society, we kind of losing a generation, so to speak, because we're not really addressing the main concerns as it relates to why the youth turn into violence. And mainly that is because of lack of economic empowerment and mental health. Because I think we as a society now, is high time that we realize that secondary school isn't really equipping the youth with the tools necessary to be a normal functioning person in society, and giving them tools that they can use to be self-sufficient in a sense in terms of economic empowerment. Like, we ain't really doing that in schools, and I think that we need to address that as well. And also the mental health, because as Fabian Sargeant rightfully said, there's no young person that is born into this world as like, I want to choose violence. It doesn't really work out. They are either a product of their society, or I'm saying that them seeing school and then telling themselves, you know what, like, I like the power that has come with this here. I feel confident it's our life, so this is what we want to do. Because when it is now saying a young person left school now, and them ain't really got the skills really to be a functioning member of society, they have nothing left to turn to other than violence, because that's what it is, them seeing that making the money and thing. So I believe that we as a society, we gotta come together and address that.
Well, thank you for your comments, caller. Mentioning some very key things there, which Cheryl, you too would have mentioned from the research that the unit has done as well. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back in a moment and discuss some of those comments from our caller. We're fighting crime using the research done by the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit. Cheryl Willoughby is the director. Cheryl, one interesting slide here as far as the data goes. I'm seeing that we're looking at motivation for using firearm, motivation for the young people who have been using these firearms, and we see that the main reason for that motivation is that they're saying is protection. Talk about that. protection followed by self-defense. That's two of the main reasons. Those are two of the main reasons why young people, according to the research, they're seeking firearms. Talk to me a bit about that.
Quite a few of the murders that we examined, we found that a lot are retaliatory in nature, meaning that someone discharge a firearm at a person, and in retaliation, they're going to a community and they also commit a similar offense. So that the young people who are now arming themselves believe that they are now have to protect themselves as they move around the communities, etc. So they go to parties, they go to fetes, etc., and they arm themselves in the event that someone there may have a gross with them. And that's an issue. That's a problem that we are seeing, because what that speaks to is the lack of young people being able to resolve conflict in a way that will not go as far as them committing a serious crime like murder. What we are also finding as it relates to the motivation for carrying weapons is that, as our research is showing, it's a street culture. It's where people are now using weapons in order to commit further crimes, like burglaries, robberies, etc. It is also linked very closely, and I'm sure when Assistant Superintendent White comes on, he will also speak to the nature of crimes being committed within communities. But we are also finding that it is linked to the drug culture, because as you know, with drugs come guns, because you need guns in order to protect your interests. So that when we speak to the whole issue of motivation, there are several. And Tameshia can probably add some more to this discussion as it relates to this particular piece of research. But from my understanding of what we are seeing happening within communities, certainly we are not seeing instances where these murders are predatory in nature, meaning that they are being committed against persons who they don't know each other, but certainly they have some sort of conflict going on, and as a result, you're finding that persons are targeting each other. So I will defer to Misha to further explain some
I,
of the findings
I,
from this particular research, and so I'll defer to Misha.
yeah,
And as you do that,
I,
Tameshia,
I,
Phoebe, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but I want to hear from Tameshia because looking at some of this data, how recent is this? How recent is this data?
Hi, Shane. Okay, so the firearm one, as you said, is the 3 years, 2018 to 2020. The report on the profile of gun violence, I believe, because that was another officer that completed that, but that was also recently concluded in 2018. So it isn't a deal. It's not a late, if that's the correct word. There are recent research that have been completed. But to continue on what the director was saying, for my homicide study, I did an interview with the police, and I was asking like what's the motivation in their investigations that they were finding, and it all boils down to gun activities. And if we go back to the slide where we were talking about the motivations and we have protection, you will see that following protection is self-defense, and following that is gun relating. And all of those things are related, as the director says, it's all about retaliation. It's all about is someone do this as a part of a gang. If your gang is attacked, then you retaliate. So so when we're looking at motivation, we have to think that it boils down to gang activities. We did a we did a gang study a couple years ago, and it was found that firearms has become a preference among these gang members, because again, ease of use. Because compared to a knife, you have to get close to someone with a knife, but firearm is more in person. So firearm tends to be the preferred method among gang members.
Yeah, and as your study shows, it's easy to acquire firearms in Barbados.
Because
Wow.
the inmates, because this particular report was as a result of interviews with inmates, about 199 males and one female, and the relative say it's easy, from easy to very easy to get access to illegal firearms.
Wow. We're on the line. Good night. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your question?
Hi, good night. How are you guys doing?
We're doing pretty okay.
Good. I have a comment. I do appreciate the role and the value of evidence-based interventions, and how data can inform how we proceed. I think there's a particular fact as it relates to criminal activity in Barbados. It is usually the dons, the drug lords, that criminal network who recruits young men and teach them the ropes, really, in terms of doing crime, and in terms of how we treat to stopping that. There has been a reticence in terms of dealing with the matter. I think we have to be strategic in terms of deploying the appropriate personnel to counter that, and we've not been doing that. We've had we've been kind of lagging and wasting time as it relates to getting to the source. So I'm of the view that we have to put the correct personnel on the ground in the communities to counter that stuff. And unless we do that, we will be wasting time.
Thank you, caller, for your comments. Fabian, you wanted to add something to the discussion a short moment ago.
Yes, Shane, I am a professional, and we're all professionals operating in a professional environment. But there's a type of, I should say, a tide that is pushing really, really hard against what we are doing at our level in relation to this whole issue as it relates to crime. Only recently, I heard a very popular DJ advertising that if you don't have a gun, you're not a man, okay? And people, are listening to this stuff, and they are behaving in some real, I don't know. But this is what is happening in the society that we live in, where we have DJs who are really, really having a big influence on young people, pushing for this gun thing. Now, we look at the statistics, and I saw there just now that protection is one of carries the highest rate on the highest number on that chart just now. However, if you really get to speak to a number of these guys, okay, as it relates to poor decision making being a real issue, these guys have some real low self-esteem. They have low self-confidence. A lot of them get involved in this activity due to acceptance that they do not get in their households. Okay, they don't feel loved by their families, so they go out and they feel loved in the gangs, and they feel loved by people who are telling them to do wrong. And we are working against that. It's like you're telling someone, okay, come, let's do the right thing. But the wrong thing seems more attractive because it is touching their emotions. It is touching what we consider as their own personal needs. Okay, so we need to really get to a number of these DJs, these people that influence the young people, and the Ministry of Youth has really tried to reach out to counteract that with the anti-violence campaign and trying to push positive messages in music, and having these same young people even put their own messages into the music. But for some reason, it seems as if the two tides is like two magnets pushing against each other and pushing back. And we need to find a way where we can overpower this negative type of behavior.
It's an uphill battle. It's a real tough challenge that you have to deal with in battling those messages, because you hear it, as you rightly said, from some of the DJs promoting that kind of violence as well. We have another caller on the line. Good night. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your question, caller?
Blessed good night to you all. Hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you loud and clear.
Listen, Your last caller made a very wonderful contribution. It's well read out and very good. I thought that was just the crux of the matter in Barbados. But I want to say that 2 callers ago came and the mayor said something, but we're not fulfilling and giving people enough things to work with, and that's not true. All these 2 governments in this country over the years have given young people a chance to reclaim themselves and do things to put things in schools and other things to help them, even at these politics. And so that's not true. I don't agree with that. But the problem is that violence comes from many places, my friend. Antisocial behavior comes from certain ethics of family. It comes from genetics because if you're not keeping the Lord and what the Lord is saying is right. It comes from genetics and it comes from many other things, okay? And you see, if a fella has something in mind, you see, there's a lot of hate against people. If a fella born poor, and if he's poor, you don't want to elevate himself. You feel that you must hate people that are poor, and that becomes a tool for your hate. You see, Andy Gabby character, I grew up with him in the area with him, and he's an example of what black young men could be today. He's a classic. When I see Gabby and Gabby talk, I grew up with him. I know that he's an example of what black people can be. And you see, this is the kind of thing we should try to be the best, and not to what wasn't be just because we didn't grow up wealthy and things. There are many people who didn't grow up wealthy in this world and became great people, and that is the classic example. So I think that saying that the governments and this body and get these things and things is stupidness.
Well, thank you, caller, for your contribution. I really think there are a number of things that affect the crime wave that we are seeing in our society and really in societies across the world. And the caller there mentioned poorer societies or the lack of wealth affecting how people respond and how people grow and how people become responsible citizens in society. Has there been any research done to suggest that people from poor communities are the ones that end up on the wrong side of the law? Cheryl or Tameshia, maybe you can answer that question.
Sir Devonish 2 years ago that surveyed high crime communities, those communities that were known to have a lot of gun violence, as well as those communities that the police were able to identify as having high levels of crime. And what we found within those communities was a high level of unemployment as well as other risk factors. These were also communities that were densely populated, specifically those communities where you had poor housing, where you had a lot of social disorganization at the community level. There were no strong ties to the communities, and therefore you will find that you had a lot of persons that were sort of transient, coming and going, and not really have those strong ties to the communities. So those were the risk factors that we found within those communities. As you said, Shane, you can label them as the poor communities, but what I would want to do is to reference the statistics and the research that we have to say that the communities that we surveyed were the ones that are densely populated, had high number of young people who were unemployed and living on the blocks, who indicated that they wanted opportunities but lacked opportunities. And this is not me speaking, this is the research that is speaking. And those who were involved in not the formal employment sector, but certainly the underground employment sector. And for those communities, we had several recommendations put forward by the researcher, which we are currently working on through working with our stakeholders and ensuring that those particular risk factors are targeted at these young people living in these high crime communities.
And hopefully tonight you'll be able to share some of those recommendations with us here on The People's Business. We're talking fighting crime using research with our friends from the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit, and of course Fabian Sargeant with Barbados Youth Advance Corps. We're still trying to connect with Mark White, the Assistant Superintendent of Police, but we're having some technical challenges there. Hopefully we can get those sorted out shortly. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back with more on the People's Business. Back here on the People's Business, we hope that you're having a good night and getting some good information as we continue to share with you here as we talk about fighting crime using research. We have another caller on the line. Good night, caller. Thanks for calling us here on the People's Business. What's your question?
Good evening. I am here listening to your program, and the data collecting is serving its useful purpose. But Mr. Sargeant spoke about what is happening now is happening from childhood problems and now being manifested in adults. So maybe, yes, we need the data, but maybe we need data to collect about the parenting now. What happened from that parent, from pregnancy through to maybe lack of food, because seeing that they have a very low IQ. So there have to be something inside there that we have to look at. So when we collect this data, we can have to get this data to look at what happened to these parents. Rather than only dealing with children, we can also have to look at the parents. And we have to look at it pregnancy through nourishment, through school, what is happening. So I think that is a part we have to look at. But I am with Mr. Sargeant that these problems are really being manifest from childhood. So we got to look at that childhood problem.
Thank you so much, caller, for your contribution. Tameshia, have you been doing any research regarding some of the parents of the individuals who have been caught up in a life of crime?
Actually, not the parents. Right now, as when you was reading the research, you say phase 1. We are actually doing a phase 2 of that, the firearm homicides, where we want to interview the inmates who have been incarcerated the 2018 to 2020 to basically figure out from them their home situation, education. So we will be answering questions like who they live with, how was there any domestic abuse, anything along that line. So we are not at the moment dealing with the parents, but the phase 2 will involve getting the information from inmates who have actually been arrested for firearm homicides. That should be completed next year.
Next year. Your team has been doing a lot of great work, and to delve into the research in such detailed fashion is really going to give you some answers, we hope, that could respond to what we are seeing in society right now, especially as it relates to firearm use, the ease of getting firearms, and these homicides committed with using firearms. We have another caller on the line. Good night. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your question or comment?
Good night, Mr. Seeley. It's mostly a suggestion as well. I am calling to say that it's not only the uneducated who commit crimes in Barbados. I would like to hear some statistics and research on who was bringing guns in Barbados, because it cannot be the uneducated. Who's bringing guns in Barbados, and then why aren't there punishment to suit the crimes committed? Thank you very much. I listened to your response.
So, Cheryl, I'll put that to you as you're the director. Maybe you are in a position to hear conversations about addressing that, because there has been a lot of talk in the community at various levels about how these guns are getting into Barbados. How are they getting into the hands of these young men in various districts across the country? What can you tell us? Is there anything that you can tell us in that regard?
Well, all I can say is that when we conducted the gun study, we interviewed inmates, and that was one of the questions that was asked, and it was a question that wasn't answered for obvious reasons, because there is always that fear element involved in such revelation. So therefore, it is a question that can be answered by the police officer when he comes online, since they are more intimately involved on the streets with persons who are involved in the drug trade, in terms of arresting and charging, and certainly the information garnered from the interview will form a key role in their prosecution. So therefore, I will defer any additional comments the police officer when he comes online. Also, Shane, I want to address the whole issue of women involved in this whole crime situation that we find here in Barbados and across the region, because it's a regional problem. What we found from our gang research is that women are also involved to a large extent in the violence that we are seeing happening in our country. We are seeing that in some instances they are the mastermind of some of the serious crimes that we are seeing. They're the ones who are the partners of the gang leaders, etc., and therefore they play an integral role in some of the decision making as it relates to crime and violence happening in our communities. It's a population that we often do not speak about, but certainly we're seeing the changing nature of crime in Barbados, where women are now playing a pivotal role in some of the serious crimes that we are seeing perpetrated at the community level. And I think that it is a discussion that we must have, given our history as Barbadians being a very conservative people, and now how we are seeing our young women gravitating towards that whole street culture and violence that we are seeing happening within our society.
Well, hopefully we could get some answers from the Assistant Superintendent of Police, Mark White, who has joined us on the phone line. Mark, so good to have you finally joining us here on The People's Business as we talk about fighting crime using the research. And you're using the research on your end to fight the crime. Let's first talk about what you're hearing in terms of what we just mentioned, guns coming into the country. And I'm so sorry that you had to come in on the back end of this conversation. But the question has been asked, how are these guns getting into the hands of these young men ages 20 to 29 for the most part, and where they're coming from? Have you been able to really get a definitive answer for that question about how these guns are coming into the country and getting into their hands?
Well, good night, Shane. Good night to the other panelists. Good night to the viewers and the listeners. Had a myriad of problems and technologically, so I'm glad to be in on the conversation. We look at the whole dynamics of gun violence and we talk about the importation of guns. We know that guns are not manufactured in Barbados. We know that for sure. The intelligence shows that they're coming to the island through the ports of entry. Our investigations have shown that the traces link back to most guns coming in from the U.S. I would say that the average youngster on the ground, uneducated, not working, when you talk to them about the cost of guns or the prices of guns at $5,000, $10,000, where would they get this kind of money from to purchase a gun? You realize many times that the people who have the power and have the money are mostly in the what we call troublesome youth group, what we call the leaders, the dons, the guardsmen, whatever they call them. And they are just kind of initiate these youngsters and give them guns to go out and do these nefarious acts and so on. And that is what our intelligence suggests. It is not easy to penetrate, as they say, the big fish, because by and large, gun interdiction is driven by intelligence. We've been getting good intelligence, and we've been able to see some rewarding results. We can look from the year 2016 up to September 2021, and we've been able to recover 483 guns off the street and 9,246 rounds of ammunition. So there's a clear indication that guns are out there, and we just developed some strategies how to combat it in violence, and we see that it's a very good fruit, and we really, again, thank the public for giving us the information that we can recover these guns off the street.
Yeah, but as Cheryl was mentioning a short while ago, it's hard to get some of the information, especially in terms of the links for where the guns are coming from. Cheryl would have put the question to some inmates, and of course they refused to answer the question. What do you do on the policing end of things to connect the dots?
Like Cheryl said, it's very hard to connect the dots. Because when you bring these people into custody, you recover these guns, you ask them where the guns come from, they refuse to answer you because of fear, because of their bosses and so on, because they don't want to expose these persons who are really the real owners of the guns. So many times they prefer to go to prison and serve their guns rather than to reveal the sources of these firearms.
Well, it's something that we see play out in many movies and television programs about people not wanting to be so-called rats or snitches, and that's where the culture has gone. And you rightly, the research also mentions how the part that culture plays in all of this. I'm pretty sure one slide I saw spoke to the fact that culture is a big part of the gun violence as well, Tameshia.
Yes, please. I think that was, I can't remember the last slide, this growing street culture. So as you were saying, being a snitch, not wanting to be known as a snitch, that's all part of being in street culture. So getting information will be a bit difficult. I mean, they will share information with you, but when it comes to those hard things, they're a bit more reluctant. They're more reluctant to share.
Yeah. So Fabian, when you hear some of these stories coming out of the research, it really goes back and it speaks to some of these conversations that you've had with some of these young men.
Yes, it very much do. And I just really wanted to just step back a little. The caller that spoke about parenting and so forth. The Ministry of Youth, again, has also been very proactive in terms of implementing parenting programs. And sometimes, these resources are available to individuals to access, but some people may not want to because they may think that there's nothing someone can teach me. But I really would like to reach out there to those parents, or parents generally, to just let them know that parenting sessions and parenting classes are not there necessarily to teach you to be a parent, but they're there really to give you some additional skills in that toolbox. You just need to have that extra tool to know that whenever something goes wrong, how to deal with it in a different way. Okay, most of us teach our children based on how we were parented, but there's an alternative to what we know. As it relates to these youngsters and not being able, not you should say, calling out on the individuals who these guns belong to and so forth. Shane, I mean, when we look at that information, I one of the things that I really try to do in my practice is to look beyond what they want me to see. So you see a statistic like that, or you see a phenomenon like that, and you realize there's a lot more to this. And I mentioned it a bit earlier, the whole concept of acceptance and the family. Okay, where we really need to start penetrating the family a lot more, having the family, creating environments where these boys can feel, I say boys, but it could be everybody, boys and girls, men and women, can feel accepted, where they can feel belong, and they don't have to reach out to these unscrupulous characters for love, who's going to drive them down the path of negativity. So you really, really need to start really touching the core of the problem. Most of what sometimes we have a tendency of doing is responding to the end result. When that crime is already being committed. But I really would like to implore a number of individuals, and I mean, in the ministry, we try to do that in everything that we do. We try to get into communities. We engage individuals at the individual level. We engage groups. We try to tap into the non-governmental organizations, the charities, the churches. We try to use all the resources to our availability to really, really get to the core of these issues. And it is really for individuals to be responsive and to really accept. I mean, what people got saying, you can't go to the water, but you can't make it drink. You can provide all the resources you have to the individuals, to the communities, but it's up to the communities to reach out and really take advantage of what is available to them.
And up to the individuals as well. And it speaks to something that you mentioned earlier, the comfort that some of these youngsters feel in the arms of these so-called gangs. And I want to put that question to Mark. Mark, Assistant Superintendent, what can you tell us about gang culture in Barbados and its prevalence right now?
Gun violence, are there any questions? Hello?
Gang violence, and the prevalence of gangs here in Barbados.
Well, gangs is always a funny topic to discuss. We call them trouble youth groups, as opposed to gangs. Gangs are always debatable. But it's this whole image of badness. When you have a gun, you feel empowered. You can do anything. You're not afraid of anyone. So it's all about having a gun on your hip or your waist and moving around knowing that you're well protected. When you're associated with a group, as I think Fabian was saying, you have this kind of protection. If anybody interferes, I would call my group for you. I would call my brothers for you or my blood for you. And so there's this whole empowerment kind of aspect. So the youngsters now, again, we have the dons or what we call them. They recognize that in these impoverished neighborhoods, the parents can afford to support the children, send them to school sometimes. So sometimes they're paying the bills and they're giving the children money and so on, So they see them as like a savior. And so they kind of gravitate to them, not knowing there's a real form of initiation. So you give something for something, so it's not really a freeness as such. So then the next thing they want to go, they want to commit crime, they want to protect their drugs and protect their turf and so on. And then next thing you know, these innocent children are just wrapped up in it. So it's all about promoting the badness image and having that protection and the acceptance among the group. And just the way that you have power and you can beat off some shots of those things.
Well, listen, let's take a quick pause. We're going to talk a bit more about gang violence and the gang culture that is prevailing in our society right now, right here on the People's Business as we fight crime using the research. We'll take a quick pause and be back in a few moments. We're zoning in on talking about the prevalence of the gang culture here on the People's Business as we focus on the overall topic, which is fighting crime using research. Before we get back to that part of the discussion, let's go to the phone lines. We have another caller. Caller, good night. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your question?
My question, simple question. Is it there an influence more so than anything else? You think that? I'm not hearing you.
We're listening to your question.
I was saying, is it there an influence? I think that as far as the youth in this country is concerned, that the foreign penetration, the interest that comes from overseas seems to be greater than what we are offering here in terms of the research study. Now, I have been following the Ministry of Youth, and I don't like the idea of copying copying some of the things that will come off of the network and force it onto the youngsters in Barbados. I think Cheryl, Ms. Willoughby is doing a fine thing, and also the other young lady, but there's somewhere, as far as I'm concerned, haven't seen the performance of young people in Barbados, haven't heard your discussion. Now when I watch the data that is presented here tonight, there's a lot of work that's been done. But somewhere along the line, you're allowing an external influence to penetrate what you have achieved, what the police have achieved. There's an external influence either by way of penetrating our news. Right.
Well, thank you, caller, for your comment and question. So the question is about these external influences that are taking hold of our young people here. And I'm thinking that the caller is speaking about what we would see on the various networks, whether it be social media or general mainstream media, with some of the messages being pushed in probably rap music or other genres, reggae music as well. We hear a lot of gun tunes, and I remember that there was that big discussion about the music and the effect that it can have on young people. That big blow up earlier this year with some of our local artists getting involved in that discussion as well. Fabian, what can you tell us in relation to that, about these external influences that are affecting our young people?
There have been always external influences. I mean, from the time, let's say, when both yourself, myself, were little boys, and there have always been external influences. Maybe how these influences come about with the internet is somewhat changed, where young people are a lot more engaged. However, it is not a situation where there is one, you can blame one particular scenario for what is happening now. We have a number of social factors affect the behavior, the environment that is created for these young people. So it is not only the external music, but it's a lot of what happens within the home, is what happens within schools. Cheryl made a reference earlier to literacy issues. There are psychological issues, there are mental health issues. I mean, we can go on. Sometimes there are even issues as it relates to resources for young people, in terms of getting involved in positive stuff. So, I mean, yes, the external influences, yes, there is some blame that can be placed on them. I would not be quick to cast all the blame on the external influences directly.
Assistant Superintendent White, I want to come back to you to talk about this gang culture. You said you wouldn't call it gangs or call them gangs necessarily, but when you look at the motivation factors, going back to the research done by the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit, at number 3, the third ranked motivating factor for firearm possession or use is gang related. So you have the unit saying, according to their research, there are a number of young people who pick up the gun, they use a gun for gang related activity. Is this what you're seeing as well playing out on the side of the Royal Barbados Police Force?
As I said, Shane, I use that word very cautiously, so I prefer to refer to them as trouble group. Yes, we find.
Why? Why don't you want to refer to them as gangs, Assistant Superintendent White?
Again, as I said, it's always been debatable. Gangs have a lot of structure, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of power. When we look at these groups, a lot of them are just not highly organized, not properly structured. Just a group of fellas lining on a block, and there's probably one man with all the money. He's just giving people, a little money or whatever to do stuff. So I don't, within the strict definition of gangs, I don't know about what we have in Barbados. And there was a debate that was going on for quite a long time, and I don't want to go into that. I prefer to call them trouble groups, but if people want to refer to them as gangs, that's fine.
And in terms of the related activity, in terms of the use of guns, and what are you seeing now? Has the situation worsened over the last 2 years during the pandemic?
Well, no. What happens? We have started and we've rolled out some strategies to combat the gun violence, and we've been very tremendous to the said. So far this year, we've had 206 gun-related crimes as compared to 381 last year. So we see that the strategies are working, and we've covered 49 guns so far and 700 rounds of ammunition. So the interdiction efforts is being improved. I would say it's on the decline.
Well, that's some good work, but it's interesting to hear, Cheryl, and you would have just heard the Assistant Superintendent say you had more gun-related crime in a year where there were a number of lockdowns where people were off of the streets for a lot of the year. I mean, what does that say to you when you are doing the research and of course, the planning to address some of these situations?
Well, given that this whole lockdown phenomenon is quite new, we haven't gotten the opportunity as yet to really delve into the types of crimes that occurred as a result of persons not being able to come out of their homes, etc., whether or not there was a decrease in violence as a result of persons being on lockdown. So that is an area that we now have to delve into. But what we did find is that as the country opened back up, we certainly saw a number of incidents of gun violence across the country, not targeted in any specific area, but certainly spread across the country. So that's an area that we will have to delve into in a more scientific way to determine what were some of the causes, whether or not these were feuds that spill over before the pandemic, and because persons were then able to move around a little freer, that they use the opportunity to perpetrate these types of crimes. And I also want to add to Assistant Superintendent White's comments as it relates to some of the activities occurring at the community level. He called them troublesome youth groups. We call them gangs in our study. And it's just a matter of playing with words, because our definition is that if you have two or more people coming together to commit crime, then we would define them as a gang of individuals. And we certainly have seen at the community level where you have groups of people who number as high as 58 in a particular group who have been getting together within the communities and committing crime. So as Assistant Superintendent White rightly said, it's a matter of definition and how persons perceive the activities and the groupings at the community level among our young people. But certainly as it relates to the whole pandemic and whether or not we are seeing an increase or a decrease in gun violence, what I will say, based on my anecdotal evidence and seeing what is happening and putting on my researcher hat, I am seeing that as soon as we got a little ease in terms of the ability to come out and interact again, we definitely saw an increase in the number of crimes occurring at the community level.
So much work done by you and your team, and we thank you for sharing it with us. right here on the People's Business. We'll take one final break before we come back to wrap up this conversation tonight, speaking about fighting crime using the research right here on our program. We'll be back in a moment. We have been speaking for almost the last hour and a half now about fighting crime using the research with our guest tonight, Cheryl Willoughby, the Director of the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit. Tameshia Howell is with the unit as well. She's a senior statistician. Fabian Sargeant is a program officer with the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps. And on the phone line, we have Mark White. He is the Assistant Superintendent of Police with the Royal Barbados Police Force. So we want to give you all those final comments to share with us as we wrap up our discussions tonight on fighting crime using the research. I want to start with you, Tameshia, because you are doing a number of studies. You've been doing a number of studies over the past few years. Where does your research take you next?
Hi, Shane. So my research takes me next, as it is the same phase 2 of the homicide study, where I want to look into the criminal risk factors of those persons being charged for firearm offenses. I'm also dealing with, as a senior statistician, I also want to improve the sharing of statistics between the departments, because as a research department, we really rely on the police, we rely on different departments, the court, the prison. So if we can have that relationship where we share the information, that analysis can be more frequent, we can be producing monthly, yearly reports that can go to the public holders so they can see not only what the department is doing, but also so that they could use the findings to actually continue to use the findings to inform their policies, their projects, and their interventions. So for me, it's to continue doing research, continue looking at the firearm homicides, where I look at, as I say, where I look at the inmates, as well as to strengthen the whole sharing of data and statistics.
Shane, if I may add, in the upcoming financial year, we will be examining violence against public health care personnel. We'll be going into the isolation centers with the permission of the Ministry of Health and the support of the Office of the Attorney General, because we are under the Office of the Attorney General, and we get quite a bit of support from that ministry. And we will be interviewing healthcare personnel in all the public healthcare systems to examine the level of violence as it relates to this whole pandemic and violence in general within those public health sectors, whether those violent acts are directed towards the personnel or to patients. So that's a study that we'll be commissioning during the upcoming financial year. And I'm really looking forward to the findings of that study, because I know it will impact how we conduct our business within our public health sector.
Yes, and I was actually coming to you to ask you about the work of the unit. And I know that when you do this work and you provide these reports and you try to create programs to address certain areas of crime in our society, it's nothing that is an overnight fix. But are you satisfied with the work that you've been doing in terms of how it addresses certain criminal elements in our society and improving some of the lives of those people who are caught up probably in a life of crime and trying to make a turnaround, so to speak?
Yeah, what I will say is that we have been, over the years, we've had tremendous support from all of our stakeholders and even the international organizations. We work very closely with UNDP, UNODC, USAID, the OAS, with all being supported by our permanent secretary and our minister under the office of the Attorney General. What we have been doing over the past 2 years, we've been utilizing the technology in order to continue our work. Before we had the lockdown, we were in the process of strengthening the national task force. We've set up a national task force to look at crime so that all the agencies who will have a stake in what is happening at the community level will be represented there. The Ministry of Youth, represented by Mr. Sargeant, that ministry is also represented, along with all the other criminal justice agencies, social workers, etc. But what has happened over the past year or so, we would have had to scale back our meetings because of the various activities that were happening as it relates to the pandemic.
Right.
But going forward, we certainly will be strengthening that committee again. And as a matter of fact, that was one of the recommendations coming out of the study to address crime at the community level in high crime communities, the establishment of a steering committee to examine all the research that we are doing in an effort to implement the findings and the recommendations into their policy. Because as you know, policy making should be driven by research, and that is what we are hoping to achieve now, not only with the criminal justice department and with the office of the Attorney General and the police, but certainly all agencies that address social problems in Barbados.
Indeed. Fabian, final comments from you very quickly about the work of the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps and some of the initiatives that you'll be looking at going forward.
Well, for the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps, I'm looking at some gender-specific programs, as the research shows a lot of the issues that we see are stemming from males. So we're looking at programs which target the males in particular, but we cannot leave out the females. So there's some also looking at the females, right? We really want to increase our approach in relation to counseling for these young people and get them involved in a lot more of psychosocial programs. You know, it's online right now, which poses a different type of challenge for these young people, but we are pushing forward. I want to also say that for more information, if anyone wants information on the Division of Youth, you can see us on all social media platforms at DivYouth246 or the Division of Youth Affairs. We are on all social media platforms where you can get all the information that you would require about the Division of Youth Affairs.
Time flies so fast when we are getting into these discussions, and we'll have to leave it there for tonight. But I really want to thank you all for joining me to speak about fighting crime using the research. You're doing some great work. Continue to do that, and of course we'll continue to check in with you as well to find out what's happening on the ground. So I really want to thank you. The Assistant Superintendent, he's on the line, Mark White, he's with the Royal Barbados Police Force, Tameshia Howell and Cheryl Willoughby with the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit, the Senior Statistician and Director respectively, and Fabian Sargeant, he's working with the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, our viewers, for joining us as well right here on The People's Business. That's our time for tonight. Stay safe until next time.